Welcome to the Bou the Cartoon Guy show. I'm Bou the Cartoon Guy. And today I'm going to take a look at one of the classic cartoon icons that we all know and love and has been used all throughout pop culture. That's right. I'm talking about Scooby Doo.
Where are you? We got some work to do now. Scooby-Doo, where are you? We need some help from you now. Come on, Scooby-Doo, I see you. You got a silver. You're the enemy, 'cause I can see the way you shake and shimmer. You know we got a mystery to solve, so Scooby-Doo, be ready for your act. Scooby-Doo, if you come through, you're gonna have yourself a Scooby snack. That's the fact. Scooby-Doo, here are you. You're ready and you're willing. We can count on you, Scooby-Doo. I know we catch that feeling.
So, how did Scooby-Doo get its beginnings? Well, it was 1969, and Hanna-Barbera had cornered the market on cartoons for TV. Disney did not feel like it was worth the money to try and capitalize on the market, and MGM Studios had just gone under. So we're left with Hanna-Barbera, and with them having almost full control of the animated world on TV at the time, they actually got a lot of complaints about too much violence on their cartoons. So, a lot of parents complained to the station, complained to the studio. As a result, they had to come up with a Saturday morning cartoon that was less violent. And so we got Scooby-Doo. Yeah, we literally got one of the greatest cartoons from parents complaining. So, if you're listening to this, I encourage all of you right now to complain to your cartoon stations that today's cartoons are too stupid, and maybe then we can finally get something as great as Scooby-Doo was back in the 1970s. So, what made Scooby-Doo so great was that it combined two genres that were really popular back at the time that it debuted. Horror and comedy. Hanna-Barbera decided, well, Boris Karloff is a big movie star, you have the black and white Dracula films, Frankenstein. So, let's capitalize on this gothic art style. And let's add in humor, though, and make it scary, but not so scary to give kids nightmares. So, that's basically how they came up with the idea, and that's what we got. The basic premise of the show revolves around 4 teenagers and their dog. Obviously, that's Scooby. So you have Fred, he's the leader, essentially. The one that is always coming up with the plans, always deciding what's the right thing to do. He's kind of in charge, but he's kind of oblivious at the same time. And honestly, in the original cartoon, he had the personality of a wet paper bag. I mean, he literally had maybe 6 original lines, if I recall. And the rest was just his catchphrase, "Let's split up, gang." Then you have Daphne, the walking pair of tits that's always getting in trouble, danger-prone, bait for most of the traps when they're not using Skaggy and Scooby. Yeah, they turn to Daphne. And, I mean, in the original show, there was enough there to suggest that Daphne and Fred were a thing, because when they would always split up, those two would always split up together. But it was never directly stated, and I think it was great that they didn't come out and say that they were or that they weren't, because it left a lot to the imagination. Then you have Velma, who is the bookworm of the group. She is incredibly intelligent, analytical. Honestly, I think she's the best sleuth of all of the gang. If they were to actually split up and go on to do different things, I think she would have the best luck starting her own mystery-solving gang on her own. Because she just has the intelligence and the wit about her that lets her just figure everything out. Then you've got Shaggy, who is your beatnik. And let's face it, Shaggy is a stoner. There's no way that he cannot be, given the time that the cartoon was made, and given his characteristics. There's just no way that Shaggy is not a stoner. And then you have Scooby, Scooby is awesome. I mean, he is a talking dog, which that alone puts him in a higher tier. But not only was he a talking dog, he was kind of like a stoner himself. I mean, because he was always hanging around Shaggy, and they had similar appetites. It was a really good chemistry there. And the writers of the show did a great job and say, hey, let's make Scooby and Shaggy be really similar. And it just worked out. With that said, I'm wondering where the original show is actually set at, because some of the places the gang ends up going is just so far out there. These are some of the creepiest, darkest places I've ever seen. And I don't know how they managed to get there. And it always would just so happen that they would either get lost, or their mystery machine would break down, and they would just be stuck in these really gothic places. I mean, these places are so scary and creepy. They make the Chicago slums look like a Chuck E. Cheese. Well, with that said, the basic plotline for the show is basically the same in every episode. They end up in these creepy places. They try and find a way to get their machine back up, or they're trying to not be lost. And they stumble upon a mystery. Usually some sneaky going-ons about the place. They encounter a couple of adults, not a whole lot of suspects, but you have 2 or 3 options of who it could be. It's usually the guy that gives them the most information is the culprit. So with that said, it's usually some really wacky monster. Like you have the Creeper, the Black Knight, the Ghost of Captain Cutlass, the Snow Monster, the Yeti, Ghost Clowns, you name it, there was a villain of it. They'd end up getting chased by this, and starting in the 2nd season, you'd have this awesome groovy chase music. Some of the best music to ever be put in a cartoon. And it was done by Austin Roberts, a very awesome pop artist from the 70s. He gave us some of the greatest chase music. It was just the right mood to lighten up the dark setting and the dark undertones of the show.
Hey girl, you got me running. Na 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 na. My heart is lost and my mind's gone bumming. Na 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 na.
And yeah, you'd have this grand chase scene of the villain chasing Shaggy and Scooby and sometimes the entire gang throughout this really creepy place. And usually at the end of the chase scene, they would stumble upon a clue. They'd have lost the monster. And that's where they gather back together after having been split up and devise this plan to capture the monster and just prove that it's a man in a mask. So, with that said, that's the basic premise for the first title, Scooby Doo, Where Are You? After 2 seasons of that, they decided to throw in guest stars into the show, and they changed the title from Scooby Doo, Where Are You? To the new Scooby Doo movies. And this is probably one of the best versions of Scooby Doo out there. If you can find these episodes, get them. They are worth watching. Because it takes that same basic premise of the original Scooby Doo, Where Are You? But it gives you a guest star, somebody that you know and recognize from pop culture. And yes, that does destroy a little bit of the timelessness of the cartoon because you have that pop culture reference. But at the same time, seeing your favorite crime-solving gang meet up with some really popular characters, it's just phenomenal. I mean, they ended up meeting Don Knotts, the Three Stooges, the Harlem Globetrotters, and who could forget the Batman and Robin episodes? I mean, what better crossover could there be than Scooby-Doo with Batman and Robin? Those 2 series lasted for most of the 70s, because Scooby-Doo Where Are You kept running reruns up till about 1978. If I recall right, don't hold me to that. And then the new Scooby-Doo movies ran up to about the same point. They tried other crossovers with the show. They tried doing the whole Laugh Olympics thing. This is where they got really desperate for ratings, because the ratings started to wane into the mid-70s because it was the same thing every episode. And they were running out of possibilities with it. So what did they do to try and liven the show up? They introduced new characters, of course, like every single show to ever exist. And who did we get first? The most forgettable Scooby character ever. I'm ashamed to say that he is a part of the Scooby-Doo canon. I'm talking about Scooby Dum.
Dum 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 dum.
Everybody says Scrappy is annoying. Scrappy was annoying and cute. So he's memorable because he's still cute despite being annoying. Scooby Dum was just plain annoying.
Dum 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 dum.
I mean, they literally introduced a character that had minimal intelligence. That was the only thing that made him memorable, is that he was dumb and didn't realize that he was in any kind of danger at any point of the show. So that series only lasted a year or two before we get to 1979. And yeah, that's when we get Scrappy-Doo. The cousin Oliver of the Scooby-Doo franchise, the annoying Napoleon complex puppy that thinks he can take on the world. This is Scrappy-Doo. I mean, he literally stole the focus of the show. It no longer was about Scooby and the gang, because once Scrappy was introduced, Fred and Daphne and Velma were pretty much cast aside. Like, well, this guy has more character than these three characters put together, so let's just put him in and have the show revolve around him.
Jinkies!
And Scooby and Scrappy lasted for half of the 80s, I'd say, from about 79 to about 84, 85. And what made it so bad is that not only was it the same thing every episode, Scrappy did steal the spotlight. And he had his famous catchphrase, dare I play it. I mean, everybody says that Scrappy killed the show. But the fact is, I don't think that's really fair to say that this one character destroyed the show. Because, I mean, ratings were in decline. The writing was becoming stale. And they were actually having to start turning to villains that were actual monsters and ghosts. It was no longer a man in a mask, which that became a real thing. So, I can't say that it's all Scrappy's fault that the show diminished so much. Because to be quite honest, even when Scrappy was there, I would take the series with Scrappy over what's come out in the 21st century. Scrappy is nowhere near as bad as this new modernization of the franchise. But yeah, so we have different iterations of Scooby and Scrappy and Shaggy just doing their thing. That's when we get one of the greatest producers of all time, in my opinion, to step up and tackle the Scooby-Doo franchise. And he first started work, he had a minor involvement with the next installment of the franchise, and that was the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. And this was one of the better installments of the franchise. I mean, sure, we had to put up with Shaggy, Scooby, Scrappy, Daphne, and Flim Flam. Yeah, it's Flim Flam, but there's a character you never want to hear about. Is this obnoxious little boy who the gang finds. And with that said, he doesn't really add much depth to the show. He's just there for comic relief, really. He has a pun or two every now and then, but overall, he's just really forgettable. What made the 13 Ghosts so good was the fact that they went with the Pandora's Box storyline. Shaggy crashes into the Himalayas. They stumble into this castle where they find this chest, and they open it, releasing 13 of the worst ghostly spirits into the world. And they went on to cause a ton of chaos. And it was up to Shaggy and the gang to go around the world and find and track down these spirits and get them trapped back into this chest. And that was the premise of the show. Which was a really unique idea for the franchise. I thought it was a really good move. I just think if they didn't go with Flim Flam, if they would have gone with the original Scooby-Doo cast, I think it could have been a lot better. But with that said, even after when the season ended for 13 Ghosts, Tom Ruegger would, a couple of years would pass where there was no Scooby-Doo. there was a little bit of a hiatus. I think TV needed a break from the crime-solving canine. But after that, Tom Ruegger stepped up to the plate, which you'll hear me talk about him a lot through my series because he is just a phenomenal cartoon producer. He steps up and he comes up with a new twist on Scooby-Doo, and it was following a trend, I'll admit. A lot of popular shows were going to a more younger form of the cast as if they were kids. I mean, the Muppets were putting out Muppet Babies, and so you had that whole genre going on at the time, but we got a pup named Scooby-Doo. And this is one of the cutest, just most fun and enjoyable Scooby-Doo iteration I've seen. I watched the reruns as a kid because I was young at the time when the show was on the air, and it holds a lot of fond memories. You had the original cast, Fred, Velma, Daphne, Shaggy, and Scooby. And it's like they were in middle school or junior high, but you could definitely tell that they were a lot younger and just starting out. They dumbed Fred down, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but because they did it, everything after A Pup Named Scooby-Doo just has Fred being really ignorant, and it strays very far away from what we were originally given. But I mean, I guess Fred being dumb is more personality than the original Fred, who had almost no personality, so I guess I really can't complain too much about that. It was in A Pup Named Scooby-Doo that we had the development of breaking the fourth wall become an actual thing in cartoons. Breaking the fourth wall originally started in the comic books. If I remember right, it was started in the comic books. So to carry that over to cartoons and animation was a pretty big deal, and it added a lot of laughs. And it's something that is still fond and is a trope that everybody still loves even to this day. And it was Tom Ruegger's trademark, because everything that he would go on to work on afterwards, including Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, Freakazoid, Batman the Animated Series, just all of these wonderful Warner Brothers cartoons would have that fourth wall breaking aspect to them. So, to get back on track about Scooby-Doo, because I could talk about Tom Ruegger for a long while, but let's get back on track here. A Pup Named Scooby-Doo was just really cute. I mean, you couldn't be terrified of it. They took out a lot of the gothic aspects of it, and they turned it more into just a cartoon mystery. The character traits were pretty much the same for the cast. I mean, they made Fred a lot dumber and obsessed with the National Exaggerator, which is clearly a parody of the National Enquirer. Shaggy and Scooby are still eating their weird concoctions. Velma's as smart as ever. They made Daphne a little bit too prissy, but then again, everything that they've done with Daphne from A Pup Named Scooby-Doo onward has just been... I don't even really want to think about it, but I'll have to if I'm going to finish this review. So, we got about 3 seasons of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, ending around 92. The reruns would continue until 94. And after that, we were just stuck in Rerunville. We just got a ton of reruns of all of the old classic Scooby-Doo cartoons, all the iterations. At this time, though, they decided to do a lot of direct-to-DVD films. You had Scooby-Doo Meets the Werewolf, you had Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, you just had all of these really awesome movie iterations, and each one of them deserves their own review, so I'm not really going to go into any kind of depth with them, because they're really well done, and they deserve a lot more attention than what I can give to them right now. So, we're going to move on. The next step in the franchise is not really animated, but it's when we got the live-action movie. And the live-action movie, combined with what was made canon from A Pup Named Scooby-Doo and some of the movies, just single-handedly warped the franchise. And everything after the first live-action movie is just so far from what we originally got that it would be really great if it wasn't a Scooby-Doo title, because they are done well, but it's just so completely different from what we're used to with a Scooby-Doo show. The next cartoon installment was What's New Scooby-Doo, instead of Austin Roberts doing the theme, they moved away from Austin Roberts pretty much after the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You title. But they tried to recreate that pop feel in the cartoon with Simple Plan.
I'm a dick.
No disrespect to Simple Plan, they're a really solid band, but there was better choices for Scooby-Doo chase music and Scooby-Doo theme, especially in the mid-2000s. There's just so many better options than Simple Plan. And I know they contributed to the live-action soundtrack, and they're big fans of the show, and again, I have a lot of respect for Simple Plan. Just stay out of my Scooby-Doo cartoon, Simple Plan, please. Now, with that said, What's New Scooby-Doo just left a bad taste in my mouth. Because of a pup named Scooby-Doo and all the oddities that went on in the live-action movie, the animators took a step away from the gothic setting. And we will never again see a gothic setting in a Scooby-Doo series. The gothic setting still appears in the movies, but as for the cartoon itself, we lose that dark, spooky element. Like I said, What's New Scooby-Doo tried to recreate the formula in modern times. So instead of the horror aspect, we get more of a sci-fi aspect mixed in with the classical mystery. And instead of it always being a man in a mask, half the time, the villains were robotic creations, which is just really weird. It made it so sci-fi that, like, if they would have just changed the characters a little bit and changed their names, and they could have done a lot more with it instead of trying to stick with the tropes, and it would have been so much better for the cartoon. I think it would have been a lot more successful if it had a different name and had changed enough to not be a Scooby-Doo cartoon. Because like I said, the show in of itself is not bad. I mean, the humor's still there, the concepts are still there. It is Scooby-Doo, but it's not the same. And unfortunately, the next two iterations get even more terrible than What's New Scooby-Doo. Because after that, we get Scooby and Shaggy Get a Clue, in which Shaggy goes to his uncle's mansion, and they're basically trying to help out around there. Like, it's so bad that I haven't even bothered to watch any of it. It is just that awful. It was so poorly done that, like, I don't even know what they were thinking at this point. I can't even tell you. And seeing how badly that flopped, they've tried one more iteration, and this one I have seen a little bit of, and I don't even want to call it part of the Scooby-Doo canon. Because now, believe it or not, they've made Fred even dumber. And the title's called Scooby-Doo Mysteries Incorporated. And Fred is just as dumb as it gets. He is completely obsessed with building traps to catch monsters. They made Daphne, I don't know what they did with Daphne, but it seems like all she cared about was trying to get with Fred, which that was not even there in the first cartoon. I mean, there were subtle hints that there was something going on, but when the show focuses so much time and effort trying to build a relationship around the two, that's not what Scooby-Doo is about. And I'm a little bit irritated that they actually slimmed down Velma's design, because Velma's supposed to be more average looking, but in my opinion, I think Velma looks better than Daphne in this latest series. And I hear that Shaggy and Velma start going out at some point in it, which never happened in any other installment of the franchise. Which, it's completely weird like that, and the art design, even though it is a modern computerized style, it looks so weird for a Scooby-Doo cartoon. It loses a lot of its charm, it doesn't have the gothic setting, and it's really just a poor attempt to make Scooby-Doo after William Hanna and Joe Barbera had passed away. And if they saw what it's become now, I'm pretty sure they would be rolling in their graves. With that said, Scooby-Doo's given us some really great things. Having looked at all the cartoon iterations somewhat, and really I could spend a lot of time on each individual segment, and I probably will down the line. This is just kind of a giant overview of the cartoon, but really, I mean, I have to give a lot of props to the voice actors that have worked on the series. Casey Kasem is my favorite voice for Shaggy, and I'm glad that the writers decided to make Shaggy a vegetarian to keep Kasem doing the voice. I mean, I know that's a bit of a sacrifice towards the character, but I think it's a really good move to keep him doing the voice of Shaggy. During Don Messick's lifetime, I think he's passed away. I could be mistaken. Don't hold me to it. But Don Messick is a really solid voice for Scooby, and he did the voice for Scrappy and Scooby Dum. Don Messick is just a phenomenal voice actor. We get a lot of pop culture references to Scooby Doo.
Jinkies! Jinkies, isn't that a breakfast cereal or something?
There was an episode of Johnny Bravo that comes to mind. One of the last episodes of Futurama had a Scooby-Doo parody in it. This cartoon is just fantastic. I'm gonna go have me a bowl of Jinkies cereal, which would have been a part of my balanced breakfast if it hadn't been for you meddling kids and your dog. I'm Bou the Cartoon Guy, reminding you that you're never too old for cartoons.